would you say to this person who kidnapped Carlina?
You're going to jail.
She need help for her to take someone's child and make that person suffer like that.
Petway is accused of disguising herself as a nurse and snatching Carlina, just 19 days old at the time, from this Harlem hospital. Petway had reportedly just lost her own baby.
I just always believed that she would find me. That was something that I always believed in myself.
I just hope that the officials be able to get her in their hands so we can just hear her side of the story now.
Carlina White may finally get the answers she's been so desperately searching for. Ann Petway, the woman Carlina claims abducted her 23 years ago and raised as her own, turned herself in Sunday to this FBI office in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
In 1987, at Harlem Hospital, tragedy struck a young couple. Their 19-day-old newborn daughter, Carlina, who was being treated for a fever, vanished mysteriously in the middle of the night. The abductor, a woman disguised in a white nurse's uniform, walked into the room, took the baby, and disappeared without a trace for over 2 decades. No one knew where the child was or if she was even alive. Would her family ever be able to find their beloved daughter again? Let's step back into the sweltering heat of New York City in the summer of 1987. Joy White was just 16 years old, and her boyfriend, Carl Tyson, was 22. They were young, navigating the daunting world of adulthood, but their entire universe shifted on July 15th when they welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. They named her Carlina. Despite their young age, they were absolutely overjoyed. They brought her home to Harlem, ready to pour all their love into her future and give her the best life possible. But that fleeting happiness was brutally interrupted. On August 4th, when little Carlina was merely 19 days old, she spiked a terrifying fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. For a fragile newborn, a fever that high is an absolute, terrifying emergency. Panic immediately set in. Joy and Carl rushed their sick daughter through the chaotic doors of Harlem Hospital. Medical staff quickly took the baby in, diagnosing her with an infection caused by swallowing fluids during birth. The doctors delivered the heavy news. Carlina needed to be hooked up to intravenous antibiotics, and she had to stay in the pediatric ward overnight. I want you to really put yourself in Joy's shoes for a second. She is a teenager, exhausted, deeply worried, and staring at her tiny newborn, hooked up to medical machines. The overwhelming fear just crashed down on her. Standing out in the sterile, brightly lit hospital hallway, Joy completely broke down. She was sobbing, terrified of leaving her baby girl behind, even in the hands of trained professionals. This is where the story takes a deeply unsettling turn. As Joy was crying, consumed by her darkest fears, a woman dressed entirely in a crisp white uniform approached her. She looked exactly like a nurse. She walked right up to the distressed mother and offered a comforting hand. She spoke softly, reassuring Joy that her baby was in the best possible place and that everything was going to be perfectly fine. She gently urged the exhausted parents to go home and get some much-needed rest. I gotta be honest with you, this part always gets to me. That woman weaponized empathy. She saw a vulnerable, terrified young mother and used fake comfort as a tool to build immediate, unquestioning trust. Joy and Carl, believing their daughter was safe, finally left the hospital to get some sleep. But what no one knew was that this woman was not a nurse at all. She had been quietly lingering around the pediatric ward for weeks, watching and waiting. In the quiet hours of the early morning, during a shift change, someone slipped into Carlina's room. They unhooked the tiny infant from her life-saving IV line, scooped her up from the crib, and vanished into the night. By morning, the crib was completely empty. The hospital, a place meant to heal, became the starting point of an agonizing mystery. Looking back on those early, devastating days of not knowing if her child was safe, Joy White once shared a thought that truly shatters your heart. Desperately clinging to faith, she said,
I hope she's all right. Whoever got her, I hope she's taking good care of my baby.
When Joy and Carl returned to Harlem Hospital after getting some much-needed rest, they were completely unprepared for the nightmare waiting for them. They walked into the pediatric ward expecting to see their beautiful baby girl resting safely and recovering from her fever. Instead, they were met by a chilling empty crib and the somber faces of detectives. The police officially broke the devastating news. 19-day-old Carlina had vanished. She had been taken from the hospital right under everyone's noses. Chaos immediately ensued. The NYPD launched a massive, frantic search operation. The hospital was thrown into a total lockdown as officers carefully scoured every single hallway, supply closet, and stairwell. The sheer scale of the immediate response was enormous. Sniffer dogs were brought in, desperately trying to track the infant sent through the sterile hospital corridors and out into the bustling city. Police helicopters circled the skies above New York, scanning the streets for any sign of the mysterious woman carrying a newborn. Detectives interviewed the entire hospital staff, hoping for a breakthrough, but no one recalled seeing anything definitively out of the ordinary during the busy shift change. But this is where the investigation hit a massive brick wall. You would think a major city hospital would have a clear trail of clues, right? The hospital actually did have a surveillance system installed, but horrifyingly enough, investigators quickly discovered that the security cameras were not working that night. They hadn't recorded a single frame. The phantom woman in the white uniform had walked in, unhooked the sick baby from her life-saving IV line, and walked right out the front doors like a ghost, leaving absolutely zero visual evidence behind. I gotta be honest with you, the thought of a security system failing at the exact moment a helpless infant is taken is deeply frustrating. There were no license plates captured, no clear direction of flight, and no concrete evidence to point the detectives in the right direction. The police worked tirelessly, putting together a composite sketch based on witness descriptions of the strange woman loitering in the ward, but it ultimately led nowhere. They received dozens of tips from the public, but every single one turned into a heartbreaking dead end. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly bled into years. Joy and Carl were forced to live in an agonizing, suffocating state of limbo. They did everything humanly possible to keep Carlina's name alive in the media, but the trail went completely cold years later, capturing the sheer helplessness and the agonizing reality of a stalled investigation. One official perfectly summed up the gridlock of the search. The family was left trapped in a never-ending cycle of waiting. They had no idea where their little girl was, who was raising her, or if she was even safe. It was a parent's ultimate nightmare, a quiet, lingering heartbreak that stretched across decades without a single answer. While the massive search was hitting agonizing dead ends in New York City, the little girl was actually just a short drive away. The woman in the white uniform had successfully whisked the infant away to Bridgeport, Connecticut. Almost instantly, the identity of Carlina White was completely erased. In her place, a new child was introduced to the world. Nedra Nance, affectionately known to everyone around her as Nettie. The woman who took her presented the infant to her own friends and relatives as her biological daughter. Everyone in her circle completely believed the story. Nettie grew up surrounded by a large extended family, going to school, making friends, and living what appeared to be a perfectly typical childhood. She was known to be a creative, bright, and vibrant young girl who loved expressing herself through poetry and performing at family gatherings. She laughed, she played, and she celebrated birthdays, completely unaware that her entire existence in that house was built on a colossal, unbelievable secret. I gotta be honest with you, it is absolutely mind-boggling to think about. A child was growing up just 45 miles away from her true home, walking the same earth, looking up at the same sky, totally oblivious to the fact that she was the center of one of the most famous missing persons cases in the country. She looked at the woman, raising her, and simply saw her mother. Before we move on to how this massive, decades-long secret finally began to crack, if you are captivated by this unbelievable journey and want to support the channel, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these profound stories to light. Now, let's look back at New York. While Nettie was growing up in Connecticut, her birth family was living a completely different, heartbreaking reality. The passage of time did not erase their profound love. Joy White and Carl Tyson carried a heavy, invisible weight every single day, even as years turned into a decade, and then 2 decades, the calendar pages turning, did not diminish a mother's deep connection to her child. Joy kept the faith alive. She celebrated missed milestones in her heart and never let go of the invisible thread tying her to her little girl. Her intuition as a mother was incredibly powerful. Despite the overwhelming odds, the lack of clues, and the fading headlines, Joy held on to a quiet, unshakable certainty that her daughter was out there. Capturing that deeply profound hope and an unbreakable bond Joy once shared.
When I lost my daughter, oh my God, that was like a big part of my heart just was ripped apart.
I just always believed that she would find me. That was something that I always believed in myself, you know. That she would.
And little did anyone know that Mother's powerful intuition was right. As Nettie grew older, the facade would soon begin to fade, and she would start asking questions that no one in her Connecticut home was prepared to answer. Time flies, and before we know it, we are stepping into the mid-2000s. The little girl who was taken from Harlem Hospital is now in her late teens. Nedra, going by the name Nettie, is standing at the threshold of adulthood. Her life was about to change in the most beautiful way possible because she discovered she was expecting a baby of her own. It was an incredibly exciting chapter, a time filled with pure anticipation and preparation for her new daughter. But preparing for a child requires handling a lot of official paperwork. To get her healthcare set up and finalize her hospital administrative procedures, Nettie desperately needed her official identification. She needed her social security card, and most importantly, her original birth certificate. She went to the woman who had raised her, the woman she wholeheartedly called mom, and asked for her documents. It seemed like the simplest, most normal request in the world. But instead of just handing the paperwork over, the woman hesitated. She stalled. She constantly made up excuses, pushing the conversation off day after day, week after week. "I'll look for it later," she would say, or "it's packed away somewhere safe." At first, Nettie didn't think much of it, but as the evasive behavior continued, a strange, unsettling feeling began to creep in. This is where the story takes a deeply unsettling turn. Nettie began to look closely at her life. She realized she had never actually seen any of her official paperwork. She started looking at the family members around her and noticed an undeniable lack of physical resemblance. The continuous stalling over a simple piece of paper became a glaring warning sign, highlighting this growing sense of unease. A news report perfectly summarized her internal conflict.
New York City.
Nedra Nance, which is the former name of the girl, now known as Carlina White by DNA identification, was very suspicious of who she was and what family raised her. She wasn't sure exactly why she belonged to that family. There was things like there wasn't physical similarities and stuff like that. Then there was no paperwork to follow her, such as a birth certificate or a social security card. So in her late teens, she became suspicious of who she was.
She knew, deep in her gut, that something was terribly wrong. Driven by an overwhelming need for the truth, Nettie decided to take matters into her own hands. While the woman was away, Nettie frantically searched through the house, digging through personal files and hidden boxes. Finally, she found what looked like a birth certificate. Relieved, she took the document straight to the official agencies to get her healthcare sorted. But that relief was shattered in an instant. The officials looked at the paper and delivered a crushing blow. The document was completely fake. It was a total forgery. I gotta be honest with you. Just try to put yourself in her shoes for a second. You are preparing to welcome a new life into the world, and in that exact moment, you find out your own life is a complete fabrication. When confronted, the woman raising her finally admitted that she was not Nettie's biological mother, claiming a stranger had simply handed the baby over to her years ago. The truth was devastating. Nettie was left standing at a terrifying crossroads, suddenly having no idea who she truly was, where she came from, or who her real family might be. The desperate search for her true identity had officially begun. The passage of time did absolutely nothing to quiet the loud burning questions in Nettie's mind. Now a young mother herself, looking into the bright eyes of her own beautiful daughter, the overwhelming need to know her true roots became impossible to ignore. She couldn't just sit back and accept a fabricated life anymore. Driven by an intense, undeniable intuition, Nettie decided to become her own detective. She took her desperate search to the internet, spending countless hours late at night typing variations of missing children from the year 1987 into search engines, hoping to find a single thread she could pull. This is where the story takes a truly unbelievable turn. Her relentless digital search eventually led her to the official website of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
I just started typing in Yahoo and Google, like different articles, like anything that pulled up in 1987, which any child missing. And the baby picture just struck me because looking at it looked like my daughter.
She's talking about this photo found on a missing children's website, along with a composite of how that baby might look today. It was like looking in a mirror.
She began filtering through the heartbreaking databases, narrowing the results down to infants who had vanished around the time she was born in the geographical area she suspected she was from. She scrolled through page after page of lost faces, carrying the heavy, anxious hope of finding a clue. And then, she stopped, completely frozen. Staring back at her from the glowing computer screen was a photograph of a missing 3-week-old baby. Right next to that infant photo was an age-progressed composite sketch, a carefully crafted image by an artist showing what that missing child might look like as a young adult today.
Steve Lofton is the artist behind that composite.
I more or less used her mother's picture and the picture of her as an infant as reference points.
It is a 1 in a million kind of thing that happens. This is the longest stranger abduction case that we are aware of that's ever been resolved.
Nettie sat there, completely breathless. It was exactly like looking into a mirror. The features, the structure, The eyes, it was her face, staring right back at her. What struck me the most was the undeniable connection that crossed generations. When Nettie looked closer at the original baby photograph, she didn't just see a resemblance to herself. She saw the exact face of her own young daughter. The genetic echo was so loud and so clear that it was impossible to deny. The missing baby on the screen was Carlina White. With her heart pounding out of her chest and her mind racing with a million different emotions, Nettie picked up the phone. She dialed the hotline for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, her hands trembling as she waited for someone to answer. When the operator picked up the line, Nettie tried to explain the surreal situation she was in. She described the photos, the dates, and the lingering heavy doubts about her own identity. Trying to grasp the scope of the call and figure out how to direct the case, the dispatcher asked a standard, routine question: who is missing? With a voice choked with emotion, carrying the weight of a 23-year-old mystery, finally breaking wide open, she gave an answer that gives me absolute chills every single time I think about it. Me, I am. In that one profound moment, the missing girl found herself. The decades-long cold case was no longer just a file in a police cabinet. It was a living, breathing young woman on the other end of the line, desperately reaching out for her true home. No one could have predicted what happened next as the wheels of truth finally began to spin. After dropping that absolute bombshell on the dispatcher, Nettie didn't back down. The operator, suddenly realizing the massive gravity of the situation, immediately started asking for specific, undeniable identifying markers. Anyone can call a hotline and claim to be a missing person, but physical proof is everything in these cases. Nettie calmly described a very distinct birthmark located on her right arm. It was a crucial, defining detail that perfectly aligned with the original missing person profile from 1987. The dispatcher knew right then and there that this was not a drill, and the wheels of a major investigation began to turn at lightning speed. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children immediately leaped into action. They contacted the New York Police Department, pulling a dusty cold case file off the shelf that had been sitting entirely unsolved for over 2 decades. But more importantly, the center reached out to the one person who had been praying for this exact moment for 23 agonizing years: Joy White.
My sister Joy called me, and that thing made me so happy. And she was like, Lisa, guess what? They said they may have found Carlina. I was like, are you kidding me? She said, yes. She said, I'm gonna send you these pictures of Carlina. And I said, send them to me. And when she sent them to me, she said, Lisa, she said, that is mini me. She said, that is me. She said, that's my, I know that's my daughter.
Before taking the ultimate scientific step, investigators needed visual confirmation. Nettie sent over a photograph of herself when she was just 6 months old. The forensic experts at the center placed that photo side by side with the only picture Joy White had of her newborn, taken when Carlina was just 19 days old. They ran their advanced facial recognition and aging progression analysis. The structural similarities were absolutely undeniable. The experts looked at the sequence and confidently declared it a match. I gotta be honest with you, the tension in this moment is palpable. Imagine being a mother, looking at a photo of a grown woman, and searching for the ghost of the infant you lost 23 years ago. Before we get to the breathtaking moment the final results are revealed, if you are invested in this incredible journey of a daughter finding her way back home, please hit that subscribe button. We dive into profound, deeply emotional stories like this all the time, and your support helps the channel continue to grow. Now, while visual matches are incredibly powerful, in the eyes of the law, you need absolute scientific certainty. The authorities arranged for official DNA testing. Swabs were carefully taken from both Nettie and Joy. The samples were sent off to the forensic lab, kicking off the most agonizing waiting period imaginable. For Joy White, those few days must have felt like another 23 years. It was a paralyzing mix of intense hope and terrifying anxiety. Could this really be her little girl? Then, the life-changing phone call finally came. The medical examiners had the definitive answer. The scientific data was flawless and unquestionable. The DNA from Nedra Nance was a perfect biological match to Joy White. It was officially confirmed. Nedra Nance was, without a shadow of a doubt, Carlina White. The 23-year-old mystery, the haunting ghost of Harlem Hospital, was finally solved by undeniable science, setting the stage for a reunion no one ever thought possible.
A DNA test ultimately proved Carlina and Joy White were in fact mother and daughter, and today they're making up for that precious lost time.
January 2011. The DNA results had completely rewritten reality. The impossible had just become undeniable fact. With the truth finally out in the open, Carlina White, a name she hadn't heard or used in 23 years, boarded a flight, headed straight for New York City. Just take a second to imagine the sheer emotional weight of that flight. She was flying back to a city she was stolen from when she was only 19 days old. She was traveling to meet a mother and a father she had never known, stepping into a life that was completely erased before she even had the chance to live it. Her heart must have been racing 1,000,000 miles a minute as the plane touched down.
This miraculous reunion, the result of Carlina's own suspicions. When the woman she thought was her mother couldn't provide a birth certificate, she did her own detective work.
When she finally arrived, the anticipation was heavy enough to cut with a knife. And then, the moment happened. Joy White and Carl Tyson finally laid eyes on the daughter they had spent over 2 decades mourning and searching for. The reunion was nothing short of miraculous. Decades of agonizing distance, of empty birthdays and silent prayers, simply melted away the second they embraced. It was an overwhelming explosion of happy tears, incredibly tight, breathless hugs, and a profound, radiant warmth that only true family can provide.
I'm just so happy she back. I'm so happy back. And I told her, I said, you're going to get so many hugs. You're going to get so many hugs. You're going to be sick of hugs. She said, you know what? I love hugs. She said, I never had hugs like that. You know, I'm just happy she back. Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. I love her. I wish she'd never go back. I wanted to stay here.
They spent the entire weekend together, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and extended relatives she never even knew existed. They sat around eating, talking for hours, and laughing until their sides hurt. Despite the massive 23-year gap, family members later said it felt like absolutely no time had passed at all. It was as if a missing puzzle piece had finally been slotted back into its rightful place.
After 23 years, this once shattered family is whole again, making up for that precious lost time.
I gotta be honest with you, picturing that mother finally getting to hold her child again, even as a grown woman, is one of the most beautiful emotional things you can possibly imagine. But human nature can sometimes be deeply cynical, and this is where the story takes a frustrating turn. Almost immediately, as the miraculous story hit the national headlines and captivated the public, cruel and baseless rumors began to swirl in the media. Whispers started circulating about a massive hospital settlement trust fund that had been set up years ago by her birth parents. Cynics aggressively and unfairly claimed that Carlina only came searching for her biological family to cash in on a massive payday. Carlina, however, fiercely stood her ground and refused to let anyone tarnish her incredibly personal journey. She later appeared on a major radio broadcast to set the record straight and completely shut down the toxic noise. With absolute conviction, she shattered those rumors into pieces. She pointed out a very simple, undeniable logic. If this was all about a financial payout, she would have come forward exactly when she turned 21, the age the supposed trust would have been available. Her motivation was entirely pure and driven by the deepest human instinct, the need to know exactly where you come from. She passionately explained that she just wanted to know her true roots. For 23 years, she didn't even know her true heritage. Growing up believing a completely different cultural background, she wanted to know who she looked like, to understand her bloodline, and to find the connection she had been denied her entire life. It was never about a check. It was about filling a massive, empty void in her soul. Drop your take in the comments. Why do you think people are so quick to assume the worst in such a beautiful, deeply personal situation? The truth was, Carlina had finally found her origins, but the emotional journey of navigating 2 entirely different lives was only just beginning. The miraculous reunion in New York City was a breathtaking, emotional moment, but the story was far from over. Once the undeniable truth was confirmed by science, the narrative instantly shifted from a heartwarming family reunion to a highly publicized criminal investigation. The incredible story of the stolen baby who solved her own cold case exploded across every major news network, becoming a massive national sensation overnight. It was on every television screen and the front page of every newspaper across the country. With the entire nation now watching so closely, the intense public pressure created a ticking clock for law enforcement. The authorities, armed with a confirmed name and a national spotlight, rapidly narrowed down the exact location of the woman responsible for the 23-year deception. The invisible walls were closing in incredibly fast. Knowing that there was absolutely nowhere left to hide from the ghosts of her past, Ann Petway made a final, life-altering decision. On January 23, 2011, just a few weeks after Carlina finally embraced her true parents, Petway walked straight into a police facility and officially turned herself in to the authorities. When the investigators sat down with her in the interrogation room, the hidden, desperate motive behind that fateful night in 1987 was finally brought into the light. Petway openly confessed that she had been struggling with the devastating, heartbreaking reality of being unable to conceive a child. She had suffered through multiple miscarriages, and that profound, unbearable grief completely clouded her judgment. Driven by a desperate, overwhelming desire to have a baby to care for and love, she walked into Harlem Hospital and made a decision that permanently altered the course of two families. I gotta be honest with you, hearing the motive adds such a complex, deeply tragic layer to the whole situation. It doesn't excuse the immense, lingering pain she caused, but it shows how profound desperation can push someone to do the unthinkable. The official confession moved the decades-old mystery straight into a federal courtroom. The legal proceedings were incredibly tense and heavy with emotion. The courtroom balanced the unimaginable suffering of Joy White and Carl Tyson against the reality of a woman, finally taking accountability for her actions. Joy White poured out the immense pain of a mother who had her baby snatched away, speaking of the irreplaceable moments, the first steps, the school days, the holidays that were permanently stolen from them and could never be replaced. Finally, the heavy gavel came down. In July 2012, the legal system delivered its final word. Ann Petway was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for the abduction. For the legal system, this sentencing marked the official closure of a tragedy that had haunted the city since the late 80s. The woman who played the role of a fake nurse and slipped away into the night was finally held accountable, bringing a long-awaited sense of legal resolution to a mystery that completely shocked the world. The heavy gavel coming down in the federal courtroom provided a definitive legal conclusion, but behind closed doors, the emotional reality was infinitely more complicated. The truth had finally been uncovered, yet the young woman at the center of it all found herself trapped in an impossible, heart-wrenching psychological tug-of-war. She was standing squarely in the middle of a deeply fractured world, forced to navigate a storm of emotions that most of us could never even begin to comprehend. On one hand, she looked into the eyes of Joy White and Carl Tyson and completely understood the unimaginable, suffocating agony they had endured for over 2 decades. She recognized their profound grief and completely understood why her biological parents held such fierce, unrelenting anger toward the woman who had stolen their baby. But human emotions are rarely black and white, and memories cannot just be erased overnight. Deep down, she wrestled with the profoundly conflicting reality. Ann Petway was the only mother she had ever known. This was the woman who had wiped her tears, celebrated her childhood birthdays, and raised her from infancy. Regardless of the unbelievable deception, the deep emotional bond formed over 23 years of a shared life was incredibly difficult to simply throw away. I gotta be honest with you, this is the part of the story that truly breaks your heart, because there is no easy answer or perfect resolution. How do you reconcile the fact that the person who raised you is also the person who committed the ultimate betrayal against your true family? This monumental difference in perspective inevitably created a heavy, invisible distance between her and her newly found biological family. Joy White, carrying the invisible scars of a mother robbed of her child's entire youth, naturally wanted the woman responsible to be entirely shut out and punished. The young woman, however, felt a crushing, agonizing sense of guilt, struggling heavily with the fact that her desperate pursuit of the truth was the exact reason the woman who raised her was now sitting behind bars. They were finally reunited in the same room, but emotionally, this massive divide made them feel like they were still worlds apart. I'm curious, how would you navigate such an impossible emotional crossroad? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Amidst this overwhelming storm of conflicting loyalties and strained relationships, she had to make a choice about who she fundamentally was. The entire country now knew her as Carlina White, the miracle baby who finally found her way back to Harlem. But to her, Carlina felt like a stranger, a character from a tragic story she had absolutely no memory of. It wasn't the name she answered to on her first day of school, and it wasn't the name she used when she became a mother herself. In a powerful, deeply personal act of claiming her own narrative, she made the decision to continue living her life as Netai. That name, despite its complicated origins, was the identity that had guided her through her entire life. It was the name that defined her experiences, her resilience, and the strong woman she had become today. As the massive media storm eventually began to settle down, the flashing cameras, the relentless interviews, and the national spotlight slowly faded away. Nettie made a conscious, incredibly powerful decision to step back from the overwhelming noise of the press and quietly return to her normal life. She had navigated the impossible, and now her focus shifted entirely to the road ahead. Leaving the heavy public drama behind, her absolute #1 priority became her beautiful daughter. Nettie poured all of her energy into being a resilient, fiercely protective mother. She focused heavily on her daughter's schoolwork, daily routine, and emotional well-being, determined to build a solid, unshakable foundation for her child's future. She wanted to ensure that the next generation would grow up with the certainty, stability, and deep love that had been so complicated in her own early life. But Nettie's incredible journey didn't just end with her own personal resolution. She completely refused to let the shadows of the past hold her down. Instead, she chose to channel her unbelievable, life-altering experience into something profoundly positive for the world. She openly shared her plans to create a dedicated online webpage and digital community, a safe, supportive space specifically designed to listen to and help others who find themselves in similar, heartbreaking situations. Whether it is someone desperately searching for their missing family, or a person grappling with the monumental shock of a stolen identity, Nettie wants her own survival story to be a powerful beacon of strength. She wants to use her voice to empower them, proving that they are never truly alone in their search for the truth. Before we wrap up this unbelievable journey, if this story resonated with you and you want to support the deep dives we do, please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything and allows us to keep bringing these vital stories to light. Looking back at the entire unimaginable timeline, the case of the baby snatched from the hospital stands as a living, breathing testament to the profound power of human resilience. It beautifully highlights the unbreakable, magnetic pull of one's true roots and the razor-sharp power of intuition. It is a powerful, undeniable affirmation that no matter how many decades pass, and no matter how deep the secrets are buried, the truth will always, inevitably, find a way to step out of the dark and into the light. Finally, after years of pain, a sense of justice was served, and the families involved could begin the long, complex process to heal. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover for our next deep dive here at Crime Cases Lab. Thanks for watching and for all the comments. You guys make this worth it.